My name is James Stoodley, here again at Full Potential Learning Academy. Welcome to the second SAT lecture from Full Potential, and today we'll be going over prepositions and trimming sentences for improvement on the SATs. In today's lecture, we'll first have a vocabulary quiz and a review quiz based on the material we got from the last lecture. After which, we will go over prepositions and how to recognize them, and their relative appositives. We'll also be going over trimming sentences. And finally, we'll have a lesson of practice and review later on with more vocabulary lists and review questions to study for the next lecture after this one. Here is a vocabulary quiz based on material from last lecture. We have the words abate, ubiquitous, benevolent, condone, and reform, as well as the questions. Please take a moment now to pause the video and try them out yourself. If you haven't paused the video yet, please do so now and complete the quiz on your own. We will be moving on in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here are the answers to the vocabulary quiz we just took. Abate means to become less intense. Ubiquitous means to be everywhere at once. Benevolent is another word for kind or generous. Conform means to overlook or to agree to. And reform means to change for the better. And then we also have the answers to the questions below. If they don't match up with the answers you've already put down, that's fine. Simply write them down for further study and go over them on your own time. Now we will be moving on with the rest of the lecture, starting with prepositions. Prepositions. Prepositions are words that combine nouns and pronouns to create phrases and modify verbs, nouns, adjectives, or pronouns. We use these to give details to sentences and help us understand the sentence more clearly. We have examples below. He came by the office today. Essentially, we know that the subject of he came to the office. But we know he didn't go to the office, he came by the office. So he was there, but not really. In the next sentence, we have, Tom lived down the block. We know that Tom lived somewhere around the block, but now we know he lives down the block. We also have appositives, noun phrases that come before or after the subject to give it more detail. We have the first sentence example below. A miniature black poodle, Tony's dog, was very cute. We know the dog is a miniature black poodle, thanks to the appositive. We also have another sentence below that one. Maggie, my sister, is on the baseball team. My sister is the appositive that describes Maggie and who she is to the speaker. Prepositions and appositives are important to know and recognize, and they'll come up when we are trimming sentences later on. Here is a list of prepositions to go over before we go into trimming sentences, so that way you know what common prepositions look like. Take a moment now to pause the video and review these prepositions. We will be moving on in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let us now move on to trimming sentences. There are 3 steps to consider when trimming sentences. The first step is to remove prepositions or any prepositional phrases, such as appositives. The second step is to remove interrupters, which we will go over later on, from the sentence. The third and final step is to remove any unneeded modifiers from the remainder of the sentence. By trimming this sentence, we'll have a less detailed but clear sentence that makes it faster to read and easier to answer on the SAT. Our first step in trimming sentences is to remove any common prepositions. We've seen a list before, but here's another similar list to help you know which prepositions are easiest and should be removed. Take a moment now to pause the video and look over the list to the right. By trimming sentences, we'll be trimming prepositions, and we'll be removing them from the sentence for a clearer reading, even if it does not give us as many details. The second step to trimming sentences is removing interrupters from the sentence. Now, interrupters are phrases in the middle of the sentence that give more details to the subject. However, Sometimes it's either too long or it could lead to subject-verb disagreement errors, like in the last lecture. Our examples to the right help us go over how to correct for them. For example, Megan and her friend John went to the movies. That is correct technically, but it's too long. We can remove the interrupter, the phrase in between the commas, to simply say, Megan went to the movies, and have a clear meaning of what Megan did, since we don't care about John so much. In the second sentence, we have Stuart, in addition to Zach, were at the meeting today. That sounds correct, but is actually wrong, because Stuart and the interrupter is a singular phrase. We're only focusing on Stuart, and the interrupter gives us a subject-verb disagreement. Once we remove the interrupter, we have Stuart was late to the meeting today. Because we change were to was, we have a singular with a singular noun phrase. So we have Stuart was late to the meeting today. By removing the interrupters, we can trim down sentences and spot subject-verb disagreement errors in the long run and make sure that we correct them. We have our final step towards trimming sentences now. The third and final step is to remove any unneeded modifiers. By removing any unneeded modifiers, we can simply have the most clear meaning of the sentence without losing too much. For example, on our right we have, the movie was so bad, it made me absolutely furious. It's a sound sentence, but we can trim it down ourselves. We can simply say, the movie was bad, it made me furious. That is correct. We removed any unnecessary prepositions. We only kept furious because we needed to know how the movie made the speaker feel. By removing unneeded modifiers, as well as the other two steps, we have a clear and concise saying in the sentence. Bear in mind it may not always happen, but in that case, it's up to you to translate it and write it down in your own words, prepositions or not. Here is some trimming sentences practice to go over the lecture notes and to go over the 3 steps we just learned. Each of these sentences is too long, and they need to be trimmed down. Follow the steps and then have the answers written down, and then compare them to our answers later on. Don't worry if you mess up, this is practice after all. Please pause the video now and try out the sentences. If you haven't paused the video yet, please do so now and try out the sentences from before. We will be moving on in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here are the trimmed down sentences from before. Our first sentence trimmed down is, the system is archaic and unfair. We simply trim it down to the sentence answer below, and we have that simplified version. Our second sentence, the abundance leads to an intimidating climate. The subject is not the companies themselves, but the amount of companies, i.e. the abundance of failing companies that leads to an intimidating climate. Our final sentence is simply, others are concerned. Others, the subjects, are concerned, the verb. Simply trim it down to that and you have the best trimmed sentence you got. Don't feel bad if you made some mistakes or didn't trim out everything. This is simply practice after all. Before we conclude today's lecture, let us go over the review and vocabulary list you'll need to do for homework. We have 5 words below: ambitious, ambivalence, analogous, annihilate, and entail. Please write these down and review them on your own and define them on your own for the quiz next time. Please also pause now and write down the questions below that go over this lecture. List 10 prepositions, define what a preposition is and what its function is, and name the 3 types of phrases that you can remove from a sentence when trimming a sentence. Go over these on your own and have them ready by next lecture for a quiz and review of the last lecture for our next lecture. By trimming down sentences, we can see how much we can say with so little. This will be handy when studying the SAT on our own and understanding how it works when reading the sentences and questions that we'll need to read for the test. Our next lesson will focus on the consistency, concision, and precision in SAT questions and reading passages, and the importance of those and other functions of the passages we'll be going over in time. Thank you for watching. Teach you next time. This material was provided by the McGraw-Hill SAT Study Guide, Lesson 2, Trimming Sentences.